Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whatever time it is. Thank you all so much for joining this edition of Notion at Work. This very special edition when we welcome our first guest, August Bradley. I am William Nutt, as usual. I am the founder of Nut Labs. We're an integrated digital strategy firm and Notion consultancy based in New York. And I also run the website Notion VIP, where I publish kind of tools and insights about all things Notion. That's at notion.vip. But as I said today, we're very excited to welcome August Bradley here with us. He has emerged as just an absolute authority in the Notion community. He is a kind of an internal systems and operations expert with just a really good collection of methodologies for organizing Notion workspaces and kind of planning them in advance, which is always a challenge for teams and businesses who are trying to shift their kind of business operating system over to Notion. So August is going to dive into systems thinking and how it can be applied to Notion. He'll be kind of running the show today. And when he wraps up, we'll have kind of a Q&A with August, and I'll help to facilitate that. But with that, I'll hand it over to August, let him introduce himself, and then dive into systems thinking. And I'll keep an eye on the chat in case anybody has anything that's urgent to say to August, so he didn't have to monitor that. But for the most part, we'll reserve questions for the end, and we'll use the Ask a Question feature in Crowdcast to facilitate that. So if you're on YouTube, you may want to pop over to the Crowdcast version of this session so that you can use that feature, and the link should be right within the YouTube video description. So with that, August, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, William. It is an incredible privilege and honor to be here on Notion at Work. This is one of my favorite series in all of Notion world, so it's super exciting to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. I've learned a ton from your channel as well. So everyone, welcome. I am super excited to be here with you also. So this is the real privilege of being on a channel like this. It has such a great community and a dedicated group of people eager to learn together. And that's what I think is so great about the whole Notion community, is it truly is a community. We are all working together to advance this platform and to learn together. And when somebody discovers something, we share it with everyone else. So it's just fun to be here with you guys on this sort of iconic Notion channel right here. So just a little heads up, this is going to be a little different. In fact, quite a bit different from most Notion at Work episodes. So we're not going to build anything from scratch that William is so good at doing. I don't do so much on the tutorial side. I explain systems that have been built and show the potential of Notion and reveal sort of ideas and opportunities for what you can do to push the Notion system to be even more powerful within your life. I think there are a lot of great places to learn the basics. And once you know the basics, you can look at any developed system and have a sense of how to implement it. That's what I try to do, is present new ideas. So what I'm going to do here today is introduce the concept of systems thinking, which, if you haven't really looked at it, is not what it necessarily sounds like on the surface. When you first hear the word systems thinking, you're thinking, okay, this is just working with systems. But no, systems thinking is actually a philosophy. It's a way of looking at the world that's different from the common way we're taught in school, the common way we're encouraged to do things at work. And so first, I'm going to do about a 10-minute slide deck introducing the concept of, in the philosophy and the framework of systems thinking, just to give you an introduction to what it's all about. And then the 10 minutes after that, I'm going to show some examples in my system of how I've tried to apply some of the more central tenets of systems thinking, and just give you some examples of how to apply it more practically. But we're not building from scratch. I'm just going to demonstrate how I'm using it in a very established system. And hopefully that'll give you guys ideas on how to take this mindset and this philosophy and this framework to your own system development, and beyond that, to how you just solve problems in general, because that's one of the real powers of systems thinking. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but just wanted to give a heads up. And then at the end, we'll do questions, and then you guys can steer this in whatever direction you want. I'm going to have to fly through this because this is a lot of material to cover in 10 to 20 minutes. So forgive the speed, but it's designed to be an introduction. So that's what we'll be doing here. So I want to make sure you can see my screen. So it looks like we're small on the screen. And can everybody see the slide deck? It says Systems Thinking for Small Businesses. If I can get some indication, or William, if you can give me a
August. We've got your screen.
Okay.
Your screen expanded.
Awesome. So let me make sure I got my controls on the right screen. There we go. So let's dive into this. So systems thinking, why do we care? Why does it matter? So systems thinking will magnify your ability to create and solve problems, and it will empower you to build a faster, more reliable, and more efficient and more effective operations for your business and for yourself. So it's a framework that just lets you put force multipliers into everything in your Notion system and in your life, because your system is not just what Notion is doing. It's the routines and habits and practices you do in your life and your team at your business does around the Notion system. So it's a combination of the technological platform and your behaviors interacting with the platform. So systems thinking enables you to see causal relationships that others are missing. And this is what I was hinting at before when I was saying that systems thinking will let you solve problems and bring new ideas that others are missing, because most people use the traditional thought process, which we'll get into in just a moment. Notion is the best platform I've ever seen to build systems and streamline business operations. But without systems thinking, there will be limitations on how far you can take the platform. Essentially, without this approach, you're going to be building little pieces that are helpful in small little areas, but they're not comprehensively enhancing each other. And that's what we're trying to achieve with systems thinking approaches. So systems thinking is unconventional. This is not what we're typically taught in school. It's not what we're encouraged to do at work. So the traditional way of doing things is labeled sometimes component thinking, scientific thinking, analytical thinking, mechanical thinking. Analytics in general is a term you hear a lot, an analytical approach. And generally, this is in contrast to systems thinking. These other approaches are reductionist. They break things down into pieces, and you study each individual component and you optimize and you really get a sense of that. Scientific thinking, of course, is about isolating a single variable separate from everything else that's going on, so you can really study what that one variable is doing. But these are all breaking things down into parts, which is contrary to systems thinking. Now, obviously, scientific thinking and analytical thinking is valuable. So you don't want to do just one. What I'm advocating here is that you add systems thinking as a separate way of doing it with the traditional ways, not instead of. But just like, you don't want to do systems thinking by itself, you don't want to do these other reductionist component approaches by themselves. And because just looking at individual parts doesn't teach you everything you need to know about the whole system. And that's what we're going to get into in the next few slides. A car, for example, is not defined by its components. The engines, tires, doors, and seats. So just studying the engine, the tires, the doors doesn't really teach you what a car is all about. A car is defined by what it does within the larger transportation system, how it gets you from point A to point B at a certain speed, at a certain convenience, at a certain cost, with a certain carrying capacity. What does it do for you is ultimately dependent on how it's interacting with a bigger system. So all systems are part of larger systems, and every system is defined by its function in the larger system. This is the central tenet of systems thinking, that everything is interrelated, and that the whole point of the thing is how it's interacting with other systems around it. So a system divided into its component parts can't even function. So its worthwhile properties, the functions of the system, derive from the interaction of the parts, not its parts taken separately. So I'm just emphasizing this point that the practice of looking at the component parts alone and then extrapolating how the whole system will work from that does not give you a full picture of how the system works. So broken into the parts, the thing of interest in your system doesn't even exist. The function, the capability of the system isn't even there. So you must look at it in its entirety to see how it functions within the greater system. So systems thinking reveals properties and causal relationships in systems that do not exist in their components. That's ultimately what we're trying to get at here. The phenomenon of new qualities forming beyond the core properties when they're working together is a phenomenon called emergence. And emergence is ultimately what we're trying to achieve in our systems. So emergence can be big and profound and just awe-inspiring, or it can be super mundane and seemingly trivial. So consciousness and life itself are examples of emergence from biological systems, from our bodies. If you look at any part of your body, you would never have any inclination that something like consciousness or even life would form from that. Yet it does when the whole system works together. But this can be at a super micro scale too. Water, for example, is made up of oxygen and hydrogen. Each of those components by themselves, neither of those components has the quality of wetness. Yet combined, you have this quality of wetness, which emerges only from the combined system. So the ability to recognize emergence is a cornerstone element of systems thinking. And this is where you can bring a lot of new ideas to conversations, because most people are breaking things down and looking at individual components. If you really take the framework of stepping back and looking holistically and studying what is coming out of it that the individual components can't explain, then you're going to bring a lot of new ideas to any conversation. And you're going to have new insights in how your business is working, particularly in its marketplace and in its bigger ecosystem. But the ability to design for emergence is a superpower. And that is ultimately what we should strive for in building our Notion systems, whether they're personal performance systems or whether they're team performance systems for our small businesses. So this is way more than we have time to really get into, but to give you a ballpark sense of how you do systems thinking, you start by defining the inputs and outputs, what's moving into the system and what's leaving the system and how has it changed and what are the movements within the system. Then you look for what is happening that's circular, that's repeating rather than linear, because the important elements of a system that are creating this emergence tend to come from circular behaviors, not linear. And then within those circular behaviors, you look for patterns, things that are repeating over and over. And then once you find some patterns, start looking, zoom in really micro and then pull out really macro. And you're going to see these patterns repeating themselves over and over at different levels in the system. In fact, within the systems that you're part of, you'll see the same patterns emerging. And to be able to identify these patterns gives you really powerful insight. And in particular, there's a certain kind of pattern you're looking for, and this is a feedback loop. So you've heard the term feedback loop, but I want to really look at this in detail because this is fundamentally one of the core things that generates emergence. So a feedback loop is a pattern over time where each cycle brings more momentum and more resources into the next cycle. So it'll build, each one will get bigger, stronger, and stronger, or it'll break itself down. It'll be diminishing over time because of the effects of the previous cycle. So they either build perpetually or they break things down and diminish perpetually. And once you see these feedback loops, that's where you're going to see causality, because everything is cause and effect. And this cause and effect is typically buried inside of these patterns and feedback loops. And they're super powerful because they're repeating perpetually. So that's something you need to be aware of. And the whole approach of systems thinking is to look for these things and ultimately to design for them. And then the final sort of principle I want to talk about regarding the systems thinking is the idea of balancing properties. In order for a system to sustain itself over time, to have any longevity whatsoever, it has to sustain equilibrium. So any system that sustains over a long duration will have balancing properties to prevent it from going off the rails. Because feedback loops and other anomalies can be super powerful forces that are tearing at the boundaries of it. Think of a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop that's just building and building. Like, that's a really powerful thing, and that can be really positive, but it can also break the system. You need balancing properties to contain it, to make sure it can continue to build, but just not go haywire, not go off the rails and break the systems that it was initially operating within. At the same time, balancing properties will help to maintain equilibrium. So you want to ask what guardrails, constraints, or counterforces can be brought to the system or are operating in the system to keep things on track and to have surprises and anomalies or just really powerful feedback loops are dealt with so that the system can be sustainable over time. And then finally, you want to study your system's interaction with other systems, especially the larger systems it operates within. Because as I said before, the patterns you see within your system will echo themselves at small levels and at big levels, including levels beyond the system that you've defined. Because it's kind of arbitrary how we're defining our system, because everything's so interrelated. It's sort of just a model for us to draw boundaries on a particular system. In understanding how your system's operating, the bigger system will let you identify patterns and feedback loops where your system is just a component of a larger feedback loop in a bigger system. And that's going to bring insights and control in how you design your systems as well. And then finally, we don't rise to the highest version of ourselves that we can imagine. We fall to the level of our systems. Our systems keep us at the minimal acceptable level. So the higher level you can build your systems, that's the floor below which you won't fall as long as you have these balancing properties in place. And systems catch us and hold us above our minimum standards. We have these ideas of who we want to become, and we tend not to just float up to those, right? It's hard to reach those goals, but we have a sense of identity, like who we are and who our companies are, what our businesses are. And when we fall below that level, say, we have a certain identity of being fit and healthy, and we start, our weight starts rising, there's a certain number at which alarms go off. Or with your business, if income starts dropping below a certain level, alarms go off. And when those alarms go off, we get really intense about solving problems. Well, we want to design systems that raise that bar so that we force ourselves to take that urgent action at a higher level rather than letting it fall to a much lower level. And that's why systems thinking is super valuable. And then finally, this is what I want to dive into Notion with, looking at my Notion system. I want to look at how feedback loops, bottlenecks, and balancing properties can be addressed within a Notion system. So I'm going to jump right into that. I'm going to switch screens to go into Notion and talk more specifically in terms of how this can be applied to a Notion system. Let me just figure out how to switch screens here. William, do I have to quit the first screen share to switch to a different screen?
Yeah, you're not going to be able to display them both. So why don't you just...
I can drop this one. Yeah, do I close? It says close video. I don't want to drop out of the whole...
No, I will... let's see here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's good. Now I got the controls.
I closed yours, and now you have the ability to share your other one?
Yes, I've got it. Exactly. Awesome. Okay, so here's my control panel. But let's first focus on feedback loops, and then we'll talk about balancing properties. So feedback loops, again, this is the engine that can drive a lot of emergence. But with feedback loops, you want to do two things. You want to build positive ones, right? And that's going to just give you compounding benefits over time. But you also want to identify and eliminate destructive ones. So both of those are super valuable, and both of those can be facilitated with a Notion build or a Notion design for your business operations. So jumping into my action zone here, which is where I look at daily activity. This is sort of my screen, just to give you a quick glance. It brings in essential things, lets me focus on getting things done just for today. So in this view, which is this toggle view, which is where I spend hour to hour every day, 90% of my time throughout the day working, gives me a glimpse of what I need to do today and in what sequence. But I've got this daily tracking down here. So if I click into that, I've got a database. This is personal. I have a filter on. I also have, and I'll explain to this as I go, data for business, but I don't want to just broadcast that. So I'm using the example of the personal stuff, but it applies equally to business. So every morning, for every single day, tagging it to the week, I will enter in the morning this information on my sleep data, some biometrics from my smart scale, and I'll enter that in the beginning of the day. Then throughout the day, once I've entered the morning data, I go back to the page I was, and throughout the day, I've got this one slice of the same database. And the design lets me enter my habit tracking throughout the day as I accomplish these things and check them off. Then at the end of the day, I'm entering sort of an evaluation of my diet and the percent of my day that I had planned, that I actually spent on the things I had planned to spend on the night before. So the night before each day, I make in my plan here what I plan to spend my day doing. And then at the end of the day, the next day, I say I spent 80% of my time on the things that I had planned to spend my time on. So I was 80% successful at doing what I had intended to do. And then I enter of the output. What percent of the output that I had intended to complete did I actually complete? So I do that every day, and then I'll enter any improvements right here. So what that does over time is it lets me see the success rate and the performance of both the biometrics, the reflections of habits and weight results. It's an indicator of some of these workout and various habits that I'm tracking. And then at the end of the day, I've got it's filtered here, but I also track business performance metrics, sales calls, discussions with leads, various KPIs that are indicators that I know if I meet certain minimums on a day-to-day basis, things are going to work out for the business. So I track all this. And what this does is it lets me, first of all, it gamifies it because I want to hit these numbers. I want these numbers to look good. So there's an incentive just in terms of the satisfaction of seeing these numbers improving and getting better. And also it shows me when things are going wrong. It shows me what's working. So this creates behaviors in me. The ability to track this so easily in Notion with a simple table and a simple slice of it in my daily to-do list section lets me build feedback loops because I'm getting rewarded when I succeed. I'm getting punished with disappointing, performance scores when I fail. And I get to see very clearly which way things are trending. So it creates a powerful incentive for me to do the right things, both in business and in my personal behaviors. And that is an example of a system developing feedback loops and driving that. Let me give you another quick example. We can also look at projects here. So I'm going to jump into a different view here that'll show projects. I monitored projects. I can look. Projects are the unit of work that executes towards your goal outcomes. So you've defined these big aspirational goal outcomes you want to achieve, and you basically line up a series of projects to execute on them. So I have this ability, as all well-designed Notion systems for business do, to line up and monitor and track the progress of all of these projects underway. So for example, you open one up, and you're going to see the sequence of tasks that are going to help you get there. You're going to know when things are on track. You can know when things are off track. And you're going to want to implement projects that when you finish that, the next project in queue to get you toward that goal outcome is going to be enhanced by the success of the previous project. So for example, this one is to find and hire a video editor. I produce a lot of video content, both for my YouTube series, also for courses that I'm developing. And right now I'm doing all of the editing myself. Well, once I succeed in hiring a video editor, that's going to enhance this cycle, the next cycle on the next project towards the goals that this is working toward are going to be fueled because I no longer have to spend time doing the editing myself. I'm going to be freed up to do more high value implementation. So that is facilitating a feedback loop. And then ideally you design the next project to make the one following that even more powerful. So you're designing feedback loops into everything you do. These are just a couple quick examples, but really every aspect of your system should be designed to either facilitate powerful growing feedback loops or identify faulty ones that are destructive. At the same time as my daily tracking can identify and generate powerful positive feedback loops, it can identify failures in my systems, where things are falling apart, where I'm not living up to the expectations and intentions I've set for myself. So those are super important approaches. I think we're probably running a little over on my time estimate. So let me just jump quickly into balancing properties. There are many ways to implement balancing properties, so things are contained in the focus and the train is kept on the tracks. But the most powerful one I think of is the review cycle. So the weekly review, the quarterly and monthly reviews. The ability to do a systematic quick check at the end of every week and at the end of every month to make sure things are on track and organized and the system is working smoothly will enhance your system more than anything I can think of. So I'm just going to open one of them. This is last week. I actually skipped the review because the next two videos coming out on my YouTube channel will be the weekly review and the monthly review. So I'm saving this review from last week to do those videos, which hopefully I'm doing this afternoon. But just automatically, just with roll-ups, I've got all of these items in the fields in the database with the magnifying glass down here. These automatically roll up from the daily tracking. So I don't have to enter any of that. Most of this information is automatically being completed. So the percent of days that I did workouts last week was 71.4. That's automatically calculated because each day I had the daily tracking. Same thing with my sleep time. I had the full number of sleep time for the 7 days of the week. And then the average of my sleep time is 7.5. So if I'm aiming for 8, I know I'm a little under. It's not a disaster, but I think I could do a little bit better. Tracking my weight across here, and that's going to show the average output, the percent of output that I intended to do the night before that I actually did during the day after was 84%. Not bad, but there's room for improvement. So it's giving me clarity on what I need to do and where, to the degree to which I'm succeeding. But most importantly, in terms of balancing properties, scroll down, I have it organized by my pillars, pipelines, and vault system, which how I organize my Notion system, but particularly the pipelines. This is going through the checklist of everything I need to do during my weekend review. But the pipelines, I will look at my production pipeline and content machine. That's a whole system here I have for producing content. My next action calendar, my publishing calendar. Is it up to date? Is it on track? Am I slipping behind? Where are the problems? This brings incredible clarity to my entire system that I sit down and focus on at the end of the week to make sure everything's on track. And if things are off track, I know what needs to be done. This brings a level of clarity that I've never seen from any other system. For example, waiting on. I have to check my waiting on box, which is the items, my to-do items that I'm stuck on until somebody else does something. Right here in the checklist, I have the actual toggle open that gives me access to the database to do any modifications I need to do to maintain that. If I need to turn something into an active task so that I can follow up on it, I can do that there. I'm reviewing my projects right here in the checklist or in the review page. Without leaving the page, I can review my projects and the quarters they're assigned to, monitor them, and keep them on track. So this happens also for monthly reviews and for quarterly reviews. And that is probably the best example of a balancing property, because nothing keeps you on track like having a designated time to assess your whole system. You're both assessing your performance in using the system, but you're also cleaning up the system, because if the system gets too messy, it's going to be harder for you to use and it's going to be less informative, providing less clarity. So you're cleaning up any outliers, any sloppiness that wasn't, maintained properly during the week, and you're evaluating your own performance and making decisions for the next week based on what you've learned from your behavior over the past week. And then you do the same thing monthly. So I think I'll wrap that up here. I'll just note on bottlenecks. This is even more of an issue when you're working with teams. Obviously, in your own system, you're going to be the bottleneck. And if you don't finish, it's just because either you were too inefficient or there just literally aren't enough hours in the day and you didn't, realistically manage the expectations, both of which you'll learn during your weekly and monthly reviews. But that's easier to manage for an individual. For a team, bottlenecks become more of a problem because some people are on top of things, other people aren't. So some people are encountering surprises that are just not their fault, couldn't be helped, but they are, hitting these issues. And then different people at different times can become the bottleneck. So a good, well-designed Notion system can reveal where the bottleneck is. So clarity and transparency across the whole system, at least from leadership, but ideally from everybody on the team, will show where things are backing up, reveal where the problems are, and then the whole team can come together to find solutions, maybe take some of the pressure off the bottleneck and ease up the flow, because the system can only work as efficiently as its least efficient point, which is where the bottleneck forms and problems back up. So we can get into more of that if you want to. I'll let you guys lead from here with questions, but I just wanted to give an overview and encourage you to think very holistically and look for ways you can facilitate positive feedback loops and break negative feedback loops, and look for ways to find emergence within the system, something where positive qualities come out way beyond the just sum of the parts.
Thank you so much for that, August. That is just absolutely incredibly insightful, as a few folks have commented in the chat. I know firsthand how challenging it can be to, present such deep information within such a short time frame. So some folks will probably say that was, too much within a certain time frame, and others will say it wasn't enough. You're dragging your feet. It's too elementary, so you can't satisfy everybody. I think you absolutely nailed it with that. And
I do cover these things in more depth in my channel, so there are outlets.
That's just what I was going to say. If you dive into August's YouTube channel, you'll see kind of deep dives into various versions of these concepts and exactly how they're applied to Notion.
NotionProductivity.com redirects to the YouTube channel.
Oh, perfect. But for now, we can use a few minutes to answer questions. Like I said, let's use that Ask a Question feature in Crowdcast. We have a few in there. I think they were submitted in advance of the session because they're not directly relevant to what August was just asking, and some of those are actually directed at me, and I'll be happy to address those if you want to, tweet at me or to reply to the Notion VIP newsletter. But let's keep today's questions focused on systems thinking and everything that August just covered while we have them here. So August, do you want me to read through these and pick some, or do you want to read through these questions and
I'd
maybe
be
choose
happy with
an
you doing it, unless you'd prefer I did it.
No, I'm happy to do it. Let me just see here.
Especially when I start answering, then you can start screening the next one.
So one question here asks, with the weekly review, how are you getting the database to pull specific days?
How am I getting I'm entering the date. So on the day that I enter it every day, every morning. Oh, sorry, the weekly review. I was thinking of the daily data entering. On the weekly review, okay, well, again, it's actually the same answer. So every day I'm entering in the daily tracking, and that's in the daily tracking database, which is just a slice in that today view, which is right there where I spend all my day. I just open up, I hit new, I go to the next one. I should pull up my screen, but I can do this quickly. You hit new, and I'm pulling it up from a filtered view.
August, I'll expand your screen here so you can demonstrate. I know
Yeah.
It'll be helpful for people.
Yeah, is my screen showing now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So actually back here in the action zone. Close projects, open today. Okay, so I come in the morning and I see that I open this. This is where I live throughout the day. Daily tracking. Now this is filtered for today. Now when I come in the morning, nothing's entered, so it's just a blank row. But if I hit new, it's filtered for today, so it automatically enters today's date. And then I just give it a title. Unfortunately, you can't have formulas in the title, so otherwise that'd be automated. But I've already entered this, so I'm not going to actually enter it. But I would enter that, and I'd go through and enter my morning stuff. Then I'd let the rest of the day just run out for that tracking. But one of the things I enter first is the weeks. So I click on weeks here, and I have my weeks database. Now, for the current week, I always have these double arrows pointing in. So in a glance, it's very easy to spot the current ones. I click that. By clicking that, I've attached a relational link between this day to that particular week in the weeks database. That's all you have to do. Each day, you attach the new day to that week. And then when you open the weeks, it's all there. So you open the weekly database here. I open this, and it has, I have it at the bottom, but these are all the days that were entered from the daily tracking view, but they're automatically linked. And by linking these, all of these other roll-ups come in automatically, which is during that week, I entered workouts, and this is averaging or just calculating the percent of days I had a workout. The sleep time rolls in automatically because I've selected only these days. So for only these days, it's giving us the sleep time and then the average sleep time, weight, and average weight. It just comes in automatically if you just merely link each day to the week. That's it. That answers the question, right?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And for anyone who is curious about learning more about how relations and roll-ups work, that's actually the topic this week of Office Hours with Marie Poland. That'll be on Friday, and with special guest William Nutt. so we'll be excited to dive into that on Friday.
And my next two videos are going to be on the weekly review and the monthly review. So I'm going to go into that in even more detail in those videos coming out this week and next.
That'll be really helpful because a couple of other questions in here relate to kind of the frequency of reviews. And one viewer here in particular asked, August, how do you balance between a practical approach to tracking and complete overkill? In other words, how do you spend more time updating your system than doing? And then they say you've got a great presentation. I'm sure
thank you.
Just the first of many praising comments. But yeah, a few people are wondering how you find that balance between, reviewing and refining, and then knowing when you're kind of spending too much time, planning and optimizing versus actually, being productive.
Very good question. I see sort of two elements to that. One is the initial build of the system, which can be procrastination disguised. And then the other is the weekly, monthly review, the cycle, what I call the cycle process for maintaining the system. I mean, in terms of the initial build, you're just going to have to make a call. Ultimately, that should be a one-time investment for each section that you build out. And you're going to make mistakes and you're going to overbuild sometimes. And that's part of how you learn. You'll build it, you'll put it in place, and then you'll see whether you use it or not. And that is the judge of whether it's valuable or not. And then you can just get rid of what you don't use. But I think the heart of the question is for the ongoing maintenance. And this again becomes clear over time in terms of you try a variety of things and see what works. But it's become pretty clear to me, and in my coaching, I can, with a high degree of confidence, direct the amount of review necessary. So I would say, from my experience, both with myself and a lot of coaching clients, that you need a weekly review and you need a monthly review. Quarterly is optional, but helpful. But quarterly is my shortest one too. Now, you want to make it so these weekly and monthly reviews are manageable. Like if they're just huge burdens, like you can't spend hours on this every week. It's impossible. My weekly review is 20 to 30 minutes. Like that's not too bad. And my monthly review is maybe about 30 minutes. But what you get for that investment in time, and you schedule it at the same time every week, ideally late Friday. And then sometimes it slides if you have a busy Friday. And then I set the rule that if I don't get it done over the weekend, I cannot do anything Monday morning, nothing until I do that first. So with that in place, you get so many benefits. Honestly, I don't think a system like this can really sustain very long, certainly not for years, without this kind of weekly and monthly review. It cleans everything up. But the trick is to make it not too burdensome so that you can do it within a half hour. And the way you do that is you make it so you can do everything on the one page. You're not jumping all over the system. There are some things you have to go to other apps, like your email app, to clean up, that are unavoidable. But to the extent possible, and Notion does this more than any platform, it lets you bring the entire review, or the vast majority of it, into one page, which saves you so much time jumping around. And it brings all the information you need to do reflection and planning into that one page with toggles. I use toggles just so it's not, cluttered and infinitely long. You toggle open what you need at the given moment. It brings in the database with the view that's helpful for doing the task at hand for that stage of the review. And you can very quickly assess your projects, click into the project, assess your tasks for each project, make sure at least one task is active for every project and has a due date. I have this idea of due dates, DO dates, the day you plan to do the item. I plan those out for about 1 week. It's basically my outline for the week of my intentions and on which days I plan to do which tasks. And you just
and you're glossing over that, August, but it's among your favorite concepts of mine. So I would encourage everyone, when you're diving deeper into August's material, pay attention to those DO dates, because that's it's been really helpful for me to think about due dates versus due dates, and by that I mean DO versus DUE.
Yep. Yeah, we also have DUE dates, but they're not used very often, only when there's a real consequence to not finishing something. But every active task has a DO date, and that's the date within the next week or two that you plan to do it. You have tasks that are not active, that are next up or future, that don't have due dates, but you check those out when you look at projects, that in just making sure every project has active tasks. Otherwise, the project is stalled, and that's no good. But back to the subject of how much review, I would tell you, a weekly review will change your life. A weekly and monthly review will help you achieve your goals so much faster, more effectively, more efficiently. Because what happens, you set out your annual intentions, you set out your even monthly goals, but then you never look at it again. And what good is it if it's sitting in some database somewhere that you're not reviewing? The weekly review makes your intentions for this segment of time, this coming week, clear, crystal clear, and you plan out your week according to what you hope to achieve ultimately in the bigger picture. Same thing with the month, perhaps even more so with the month. You're quickly reviewing what you set out as your bigger aspirations in life, and then you're making a plan for the next 1 week or 4 weeks, depending on which review it is, to do everything you can that you're ready to do to advance toward those outcomes. If you don't do that, how are you going to get to those outcomes? You're going to, first of all, forget about those outcomes you set for yourself as targets and aspirations. And second of all, you're going to be doing the wrong things. The irony of productivity is it's not the most important thing. Productivity is not number one. The most important thing is that you're working on the right thing. It's better to work on the right thing unproductively or inefficiently than work on the wrong thing efficiently and productively. So number one goal is to make sure your time is spent on the right things. And that's first and foremost what the weekly and monthly review do. And then second of all, it lets you do it more efficiently by organizing and managing your time.
Yeah, to employ a nauseating cliche, work smarter, not harder. And I know, right, yeah, exactly. But you got to know how to work smart first. And I can imagine that it can be tough to choose, these periods of reflection when you've got kind of like, a pressing tangible outcome on deadline. But ultimately, it doesn't take long to start seeing the benefits of allocating these half hours per week so that you can start to, work on these tangible outcomes more effectively and more efficiently.
This goes back to that classic Eisenhower matrix of the important versus the urgent.
Yeah.
Like, what's ultimately going to change the game and get you to the next level? It's not these short, urgent deadlines you're constantly racing to get to. It's the bigger picture, more strategic stuff. And you've got to make time for that. And these reviews help you carve out time for that.
Yeah. And so August, I'm going to give you a choice between the last two questions. They're pretty straightforward. They're probably not deep dives since we are a little bit over time, but we're always over time from this little half-hour session. So not a problem at all. But before I do, I just want to acknowledge some of the other questions that have been asked. They're not directly related to systems thinking. They're related to Todoist integration and to sharing and permissions. These are all topics that we've covered in a couple of other places. So I don't want to leave anybody hanging on these. If you look at some of the previous episodes of Notion at Work on Notion's YouTube channel, or if you look at some of the posts within Notion VIP or some of the former episodes of Office Hours where Marie Poland has hosted special expert guests, you'll find a lot of those questions answered there. And then we're all on Twitter and actively answering questions. August is, Marie is, and I am as well. So we love to engage.
And I'll tell you, on that note, I'm also going to go through the questions afterwards. And if there are a lot that are specifically relevant for me or systems thinking, I'm going to do a Q&A on my channel, just going through those questions. I regretted not doing that with Notion Office Hours, but I thought of it too late. So I think if there are a bunch that are relevant for me, I'll just do an episode on my channel, just going through those questions to cover them all.
Yeah, and we'll certainly have August back for sure. So do submit those questions, and we'll draw from the most popular ones for the next ones. But just in terms of this last kind of softball question or more straightforward question, we have a few folks wondering. We saw your health tracking metrics, and there were a few comments about how the API will kind of help to automate that. So one of the kind of overarching questions is, yeah, exactly. What are you most excited about the API, and how are you going to integrate it into this system? Let's just run with that one, because that's always what everybody's wondering about. So how is the API going to benefit the system that you've kind of described here?
Well, as you suggested, by framing it as a softball, it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, so Notion is so good at aggregating data, organizing the data, and the ability, the need to manually enter it is kind of frustrating because it's such a good data management platform. So we need a way to bring it in with automation. It's just that simple. All of that, I would want to just come in because I'm collecting it. I'm collecting the sleep data, the biometrics on smart devices, right? So it's all being stored in the cloud and apps. It's right there, digital, So yeah, we just need a Zapier connection or whatever to feed it directly in. It's going to be amazing. It's going to change what Notion is fundamentally. It's that important. So I mean, the uses are endless. That's probably the first one. And that view that you saw was, first of all, it was a lot of, that's my demo view, because I do a lot of public demonstrations and I don't want to just broadcast personal data or business data, but I actually have a more expanded view that includes a lot of business data. And that's going to be super valuable too. Finally, we'll be able to have real dashboards, because the dashboards are limited by the access to the information, even though Notion's so good at displaying it. So yeah, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to kind of become a new app at that point. So it's one of my top two things that I most want from Notion is the API. The other is selective control over when sharing a filtered view, that if shared a filtered view, you can't see the rest of the database.
Those are the two features at the very top of my wish list as well. So, and we're not alone in that cohort either. Well, August, thank you so much for joining us here today and offering your unique insights. Like I said, I know how challenging it is to find the right balance of volume of information when you're working with such a little time frame, but I think you nailed it. And of course, these conversations are always ongoing. So we will continue to answer your questions on Twitter and in Notion's other communities online, and there'll certainly be plenty more live webcasts like these to follow. So thank you again, August.
Thank you, William. This has been wonderful.
Of course, and we'll have you back for sure. And in the meantime, we'll see everyone on the web.